If you don't want to, but there's one other thing I just want to.
No, in about a second, I'm just going to say, hey, you want to do a podcast tonight? I'll send you the thing I wrote. Okay, we're recording.
Okay, so you just about an hour ago posted about the thing at Burning Man, and also this morning Robert had a really good podcast about the Burning Man thing, and I didn't know about it until I listened to Robert's thing. Well, this isn't for everyone, so I'm just telling you. Go listen to Robert's podcast this morning. Maybe we'll release this little clip to everybody.
Yeah, this is, by the way, being recorded on September 5th, 2017 at around 2100 hours.
On a night that we said we're not going to do a podcast, but we keep recording little clips. People who don't know, Burning Man happened over the weekend, and some kid apparently ran into the Burning Man and burned to death. I don't know many more details than that. And Robert had a great podcast this morning talking about this, and everyone should listen to that. He brought up almost all the things I would say about Burning Man that I haven't already said or whatever. It was very interesting. But Randy made a post about this about an hour ago. You said something like, "Who saw this coming?" or "Who would have guessed it?" And actually, who would have guessed that somebody would do that? I did. And I'll be just straight up honest that the reason that I've never attended Burning Man, even though there's a lot of things there that I would clearly enjoy, is because with my background and with my understanding of things and with what I'm involved in obviously now, I've always been in fear that I would be somehow triggered there to do something weird, crazy, nuts, whatever. I wouldn't have thought of running into the Burning Man.
Well, the whole thing about Burning Man is, if you want to know what that's really mirroring, go see the movie The Wicker Man.
The Wicker Man, yeah.
Which is a total mind control. Go see the original one from, the 70s?
Robert mentions The Wicker Man in his podcast.
Yeah. Wicca, this is a pagan festival. There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
What's wrong with it is that, based on the reports that have been coming out of it for years, it's a huge vector. Again, like conferences, it's a huge vector for mind control and triggering and harvesting.
For mind control, harvesting, even just for surveilling and observing people and getting ideas. People go listen to the interviews that Jan Irvin has done with Steve Outram about Burning Man. They're excellent. But Burning Man has become increasingly strange and occultish and, in my opinion, dangerous for everybody, and particularly for people with any kind of background in projects or people who are targeted individuals or anything like that. Especially there's now Wi-Fi at Burning Man. But the other thing is, this is something held on government-owned property. This festival, ever since it moved to Black Rock, so probably the reason that they allow this to go on is because they're running experiments there. They're observing stuff. They're getting ideas. They're infiltrating things. They're testing psychotronic weaponry. They're testing, also it's a great place for otherworldly elements to interact with this world elements. So the technology from here to interact with dark occult energies and whatever, it's a fucking soup pot of insanity at this point. And it doesn't have to be that way, but that is the way it is at this point. And that is the reason that I have never gone, because I was always afraid that something like that could happen to me or somebody else there. And I certainly wouldn't want to witness that either. Robert brought up the point that did Burning Man want to, had they been moving closer and closer to wanting to have true human sacrifices? Was that always sort of an aim? And was this it? I can't imagine anybody, no matter how weird, crazy, or fucked up they are, or how many drugs they're on, wanting to run into fire. That is the most unpleasant way I can ever imagine to die. The only thing I can imagine causing someone to do that is hypnotic suggestion, triggering, or total
or
fucking
drugs.
But even just drugs on their own, that's still a hard one for me to swallow. Like,
I agree, but if you take the right substances and then add to it psychotronic control triggering,
and also
Manchurian candidate type things, why would we, again, it's Burning Man, why would we have not expected to see this? It is sacrifice. It's an effigy, but it is a sacrifice.
But I think that there has to be some hidden hand push that involved in this. I don't think this was just one person crazy. And it's also, remember, if we go back to the show we did with Chris and Cherie, where we talked about, is it possible that at some point they started putting the MK Ultra into the drugs? So with some of these synthetic drugs, is there mind control triggers somehow laced into the chemical makeup of the drugs? You know what I mean? Like, are they now able to see particular information into the drugs? And I think I don't think that's possible with organic drugs, but with
listen. The project often goes back to the 70s.
No, but
we
what I'm
know
saying,
even then they were trying. This is exactly what they were trying to do.
But is it? What I'm saying is there now is there like certain designer drugs that you can say, oh, this is the drug to make people run into fire. Give them to this, and it will make them run into fire. Give them this, you know what I mean? Like, are we?
Well, it's not the drug itself. It's the ability of them to open up key centers in the brain.
Sure, but so key centers in the brain and then implant suggestions also. But what if we're also at the point where they can actually put the mind control triggers into certain chemical combinations? What if we're to that point? Think about it. If there's programmable matter, right, why couldn't it just be in the drugs? I'm not saying it is, but I think it's something.
Yeah, and then we've talked about that before, and I don't have I can't dismiss it. I can't support it because I don't have enough information. But it seems reasonable to expect that by now, yes, we have that. We have the ability to program drugs.
Yeah. So
my question is it necessary given what we know about psychotronics?
No, I think it could be.
Because you and I talked about this in the context of what goes on in the underground clubs.
Right.
And the potential there to program frequencies. Now it gets interesting because because Burning Man's a huge
festival.
It's a huge venue for a lot of electronic music, a lot of experimental stuff, a lot of tech people go there. A lot of the Silicon Valley type, ultra. And I've talked about this before. The software people have always been into occultism, and they've always been very closely aligned to intelligence agencies' agendas, whether they knew it or not.
Absolutely, I agree with everything you just said.
So coding on that level doesn't seem far off when you consider what they're probably doing in terms of programming recombinant DNA and things like that.
Two more things. One of the things when I first saw, and I know it seems like not connected, but just think about it for a second. When I first saw the show Westworld, it made me think of Burning Man. What if something like that is going on underneath the ground at Burning Man, right? What if they have base under there and they're literally sending people up to interact with these, what if there are people, like completely programmed people or even not people, clones or bots that are being sent out to interact with the humans that attend Burning Man? Watch Westworld and then think about Burning Man, and forget about the period aspect of Westworld. Think about that. But also, what if one of the things that's happening at Burning Man is there is starting to be integration of cyborgs, transhumanism, things that are not entirely human? What if this even was not a completely organic person, or what if this was a clone?
Now there's a very real possibility of that.
Having a clone or having a programmed cyborg thing run into
what would be the perfect effigy? Have a live simulated being running into the fire. Let's look and see if somebody identifies this person and if this lines up.
So, but also just think, because part of the reason that they do these things is just to create a lot of emotion and feeling around it. And so what if testing, okay, let's just have a clone or a bot or whatever run into the fire and see if people even care, see how it upsets people, see how it changes the tone of the festival, see what, like all that kind of stuff, right? So we have to consider all of these things. I'm telling you right now, like Randy just pointed out, Burning Man is the height of creative technology. And so anything that can be tried or is being tried there, and it's being tried in such circumstances with people who do not know, who people who think they're just going there for a good time, and they don't really understand what they're part of. Or they're just there having a good time, and they don't understand all of the possibilities of the things going on around them. And they're out there in the middle of the desert, less water than usual, it's not hospitable circumstances, people
My God, how hot would it have been out there this weekend? It was like, what, 105, 110?
It was 110 where I am, which is not far from an ocean. So out there, it probably had to be close to 120. It's dusty. You know what I mean? Robert was talking about how there's now a private airport set up for Burning Man with 800 flights leaving and coming daily into the Black Rock Desert. Anything could be going on there. Anything. Human trafficking could be going on there. We are so not in Kansas anymore that it's just, we just need to think about these.
I don't know that much about this. How many people attend Burning Man?
About 50,000-ish, it seems like.
Okay, that's pretty big.
Right, and then,
I've been to Bonnaroo, which was, the year I went, 80,000 people over 30 acres. So that's a huge number of people. That's a city.
That's what they call it. They call it Black Rock City. It's like a week, and there's people there for weeks ahead of time setting up, and for weeks afterwards tearing down. So for about a 2-month period, there's probably during that 2 months, somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people come through there. You know what I mean? There's definitely intelligence agencies, both governmental and private, with a presence there. There's technology corporations with a presence there. And then there's just, people with, all sorts of sound and visual knowledge, some of them maybe with malintent, some just experimenting. There is.
I'll bet Scientologists had it. I'll bet the Church of Scientology had a tent there. They had one at Contact in the Desert.
Just putting this out there, if anyone has ever heard of there being a Scientology booth at any dance music festivals, whether it be like Lightning in a Bottle or any of these kinds of consciousness festivals, I would love to know about that. Just if anyone has ever, when we found out there was a Scientology booth at Contact in the Desert, that made me think, is there Scientology booths at music festivals? I guarantee you that there are Scientologists that go there.
Oh, I guarantee you that, because Scientology is all about, we found them in the alternative media. I was on a network for a short period of time that had a bunch of Scientologists on it. They're basically, they're franchised in the hierarchy, the control grid has to do with entertainment. That's why they're situated where they are in Pasadena, and why you see very high profile people like Tom Cruise and John Travolta, to name just a couple, as well as musicians like Chick Corea, as their major thrust is basically to reach people that are very creative.
There's one more thing Robert was talking about, and I didn't know this. The theme this year at Burning Man was masks. So people were running around with masks, and he was thinking, oh, it's like inspired by like the Antifa kind of thing, right? Antifa's made its way into to Burning Man. But what if it's also, seriously, if you have people running around there that are not human, and you want to make sure that it's like if they have masks on, it's a lot harder to sort of look into the eyes and whatnot. If the theme is masks and everybody's wearing masks, you could hide known agents, you could hide not human things, you could hide all sorts of stuff.
It's eyes wide shut, basically.
Eyes wide shut. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's eyes wide shut. It's the whole. That's just disgusting. And also, it's fucking 120 degrees. Who wants to wear a mask when it's 120 degrees? Like the whole thing has just gotten
Well,
really insane.
The fundamental thing that I see about this is, despite all the nice rhetoric about liberation of the human spirit and being with nature and the tribes gathering and all that, is that this is a depersonalization process. That is exactly what Effigy is.
Yes.
The act of effigy is to take and dehumanize the human form in a way so that, much like voodoo, you can target specific people in a ritualistic shadow game.
That's it. And that's exactly like that. You got it. I think that's you just summed that up perfectly. That is what is going on there. It's getting not only the people who are there to participate in this sort of voodoo ritual, but also the people who view it from afar and bring attention to it. It is just like all of this other shit. That's what we're living in. We're living in like fucking, total voodoo la la land at this point. Everything is that. Everything is what you're talking about. But that is a very like concrete example of what's going on. And so, yeah. Burning Man, wow.
All right, so we're deep into this now. So how deep are we going to go?
What, you want to do a whole? You want to do a show?
Yeah, what we can do actually, because what I want to talk about some things that have to do with, people that appear on talk shows and media people, and I think we need to stake out a little bit of a position here on information and media figures. So let's do this. Let's take a break. I'll drop some music in here and we'll come back and then we'll kind of launch into this and see where we go.
All right.
Listening to OffPlanet Radio at offplanetradio.com.
We're back on this segment. This is the OffPlanet Radio podcast. Randy Moggins and Emily Moyer, and this is kind of a format development session that we're doing. We are getting ready to launch our Patreon patron platform where we're going to ask you to support us at whatever level you're comfortable with. And that's going to mean that we have the ability to ramp up our production and our ability to put out new, better, different types of information and communicate on another scale that we've never been able to do before. So a lot of what we're doing in this show tonight is basically working through a platform format that lets us interact with information in some very different ways. So what we're going to talk about in this segment is what I call dark data. And it's based on an article, a very long article that I wrote over this previous weekend. The article is 3,700 plus words that goes into a number of topics. So we're gonna break these out in another segment I have coming up on basically hacking the construct. But what we want to talk about now is dark data and the media that we're working in, because most of you know that I'm active on Facebook. I post a lot of articles. I post provocative, sometimes controversial. Some would say that I sort of am pissing in their pocket kind of articles, inflammatory. It's all designed to provoke discussions. And so the whole dark data thing comes out into largely the fact that we are basically information intelligence operatives in the public domain, open sourcing information which aggregates into a meaningful stream, but is by no means itself 100% infallible, 100% authoritative, or 100% full of having integrity. So that sounds like kind of a cop-out, but stay with me for a minute, because what we're really doing here is not all of the sources of information for anyone are clean. We're basically dealing most of the time with information that's coming to us through sources that of themselves may be well-intended, very good people, who either may have an aspect of mind control about them, or they may be receiving co-opted data, but failing to be able to 100% vet and prove everything. What we're all left with is that we are in this open source data mining, data aggregation, and vetting process on an individual and collective level. And so when I post articles, when we have guests on, when we talk to people, there needs to be the distinction made between what constitutes an open source conversation and the actual, quote, promotion, unquote, of certain people. So Emily and I have been talking about this in the background for a while, and a lot of the information that we put out is never going to be able to be documented. It's never going to be able to be vetted. This is where your empathic, intuitive attributes come into play in terms of sifting through information and through sources to find meaningful information and information that comports with other data points. This is called triangulation of data.
Yep.
And it's real important. Emily, what do you think?
Yeah, it's that also sometimes, like in my this process of trying to figure out what the hell is going on has been going on for 15 or 20 years for me now, or actually for my whole life, but intensely for that period of time. And I listen to a lot of stuff, not as much as I used to because I'm really busy, but I listen to people that I like. I listen to people I don't like. I listen to people I agree with. I listen to people I don't agree with. I listen to all a very wide variety of information. And fortunately for myself, I have a good memory and I'm able to hold on to most of it. But what I do, it's sometimes even I get actually good data points from people who in general I don't like, or who in general I think are full of shit, but they sometimes have something that when you line it up with a bunch of other information that you've been able to sort of do enough vetting on that you know is good, you're like, wow, that actually makes something make sense that I didn't quite understand before. And so, learning to triangulate, learning to sift, learning to filter, also learning to evolve your positions over time with more information. Doesn't mean that like you were bad because you were wrong, you thought this before and now you think that. We are all in a learning process. None of us completely know what is going on. But yeah, like developing your own critical filter, your own sifting system, and your own, methods for how you triangulate information are critical. And no one should ever follow or believe or anything that someone else particularly says. You can have people whose information you resonate with, people who you like, people who you trust. But even within all of that, there can be mistakes. There can be periods of time where they're a little off. We're all under a certain level of malaise and mind control and things like that. So we're all sometimes influenced on certain topics or ideas in a way that like we might not be on others. So developing your own filter is really, really important. And yeah, we want to have conversations with a lot of people, including people who we don't agree with. There's lots of people out there who do good work, but I still don't agree with a lot of what they say, but it's still interesting to talk to them. And, so we don't promote really anybody, and so we want to be free to speak to anybody that puts out information that we have questions or that we find interesting. That have questions about it that we find interesting, and that should not be equated to endorsement or promotion.
Well, part of the problem right now is too that we've got this torrent of information that's constantly being put out, and the proliferation of volumes of information becomes a sensory overload for people who are trying earnestly. We have this constant quest for, quote, the truth. And people call themselves truthers and truth seekers and truth speakers.
That's a program, too. That's a program.
A truth at any given moment is what I like to call contextually meaningful data that integrates with your personal, first, viewpoint on things, and secondly, on the sweep of context in terms of a wider expanse, which would, it would fan out across the continuum to embrace what we call all of humanity. And see, there's programming triggers in all of that language because of the co-opting that took place in the 1960s with the media. There was a time when reporters, at least theoretically, so this is all theoretical, this is all rhetorically speaking, like Joe Friday on Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am. Well, it never really was like that. But there was a pretext, a pretense.
There were journalistic standards at one time.
There were journalistic standards. And essentially what happened was this famous little event in the 1970s called Watergate, which created an entirely new type of journalism when Woodward and Bernstein allegedly basically deposed the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, through a series of leaks in a source called Deep Throat. And at that point, it became very prominently known that journalism was an activist venture. It was actually seeping under at that point because of what was happening with the New Left at that time, the creation of journalistic organs, much like Walter Bowert's The East Village Other, which was very actively oriented journalism, the Detroit Free Press, the LA Free Press. These all became organs of information dissemination with a spin to them. You had Ramparts magazine, which was an uber-left journalistic organ as well. So we're now at the point where journalistic activism is presumed and journalistic integrity can be widely considered to be subjective at any given time based on, well, you have Fox, CNN, MSNBC. And to the average conservative, Fox News is the holy grail, whereas MSNBC goes the other direction, and that's like the ultra left thing. But the fact of the matter is it's all a dialectic, and it's all in a spectrum designed to keep you locked into a media machine that can, in one single broadcast, put out completely contradictory information and not appear to be contradicting itself.
Well, no, it's the perfect Hegelian dialectic: thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So, yeah, and then you have CNN, who supposedly is right in the middle, where that is just nothing but complete and total Central Intelligence Agency Mockingbird nonsense. And so the thing that is supposed to be centered is actually the most nonsensical of all.
Well, and I've said this before. I was trained as a journalist. I have 3 pins somewhere in a jewelry box somewhere that were the Scroll and Quill Society of Student Journalists. I was a 3-year member of that as the editor of a newspaper and a yearbook. And so I know what they were training journalists to do and be at that point. And it was all very idealistically oriented on, oh, we're going to change the world. the pen is mightier than the sword, blah, 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 blah. And in fact, some of that's true.
Yeah.
But it was a platform that was being built at that point in time, basically as another leg of propaganda.
Yeah, and this is something, we have a really cool guest coming for you guys in our next week's show, and this is something we can get into with her because she was a journalist, she's been a working journalist for a really long time, and this is her gripe. But yes, absolutely, this has moved into something that is now doesn't in any way represent what journalism used to be thought of as.
Yeah. So you have a lot of media figures out there, people putting out actually really good information. And it can get twisted really quickly, and there's a number of ways in which information gets twisted. One is that a lot of the information we deal with in our little spectrum here is that most of it's unverifiable because most of it is emanating from intelligence agency operatives, mind control programs, occult situations where there's a great deal of mysticism, either in terms of the origin of the information or even whether this information itself can ever be verified.
And even if there are documents the documents put out strictly for the purpose of misleading? Like we're not dealing with the topic that we deal with is just the idea that there is mind control is part of the mind control. So from the very beginning, we're dealing with something totally, a whole different ball of wax. You know what I mean?
Again, there's a lot of buzzwords, a lot of code words that, I mean, I see myself, I see other people use terms like triggering, which we know in itself is a trigger.
Right. It's also a horse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're dealing with very exotic material, and that's really what I've been doing for a long time. We're asking, and this is kind of the great divide that's gone on in ufology as a result of this whole secret space program thing that's being bandied about and has now migrated into the ufology field as well, is that on one side we have this demand for total documentation of facts and proof and verification.
Evidence, and, yes.
Yeah, and that's great. And I support that type of research. We have people who come on our show that do that kind of work. On the other hand, what they have done is they have polarized an entire field of research in a way that the whistleblowers, so-called witnesses, experiencers, people who have testimonies, have been sidetracked and marginalized and put on the defensive to prove things that they can't even remotely begin to prove. Case being secret space program, which we're on record as saying the secret of the secret space program is that there's no space.
It's a program.
That goes into the whole construct aspect of this as well. But having said that, there's a shitload of money that's gone missing. I mean, Catherine Austin Fitts has documented that. There's documents that seem to indicate that they've been doing some kind of very dark, high-tech programs that look very weaponized. I think we're actually seeing the fruition of that. And I said this over the weekend. The secret space program is that weather front that hit Houston.
Yep.
Secret space program is that Hurricane Irma sitting out in the Caribbean right now, brewing like a cauldron with 135-mile-an-hour winds spinning counterclockwise. That's
the weaponized. That's the weapons aspect of the secret space program, for sure. Yeah.
So, Shane's going on record as saying that it's a simulation. Shane's exact quote was, "I can name 5 places in the United States where people would have gone into space," meaning centers that are simulation centers. Does that discourage or disprove the people who have come forward with legitimate testimony about the secret space program? No. No more than the fact that most MK Ultra survivors can't prove they were ever part of a program, or they can only do it marginally so.
Yeah, I mean, But the other the part that I always find fascinating is for these people who wanted to, the researchers that only want to deal with documents and proof and evidence and things like that. For the small amount that they have found, for those things to be true, there would have to have been people involved in that, and those people would be the experiencers, and they have cut themselves off from that. There's no. I don't know how, for all this stuff that they have found.
What they've really done is, and I hate to bring this up. Oh God, do I hate to bring this up? So, going back to the whole Corey Goode, David Wilcock, cosmic comic disclosure thing.
Comic disclosure.
We basically saw a huge media ramp up, particularly in the sphere of ufology, beginning a contact in the desert, and this has been pissing a lot of people off. Basically, you have a guy who's put out a fantastic story, and I don't mean that's great, it's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic. It's fantastic that it's even being given the amount of coverage that it's been given. But because it's Gaia TV and David Wilcock, we have had to suffer through seasons of this show talking about Corey Goode's alleged participation in the secret space program, and then the whole blue avian cult thing breaking out such as it is. This has pissed a lot of people off in the so-called legitimate research circles. And I understand that. The game that has been played so deftly here is the fact that Corey Goode was a bomb dropped into this theater to create the very thing that we talked about, the Hegelian dialectic, because look what's happened. It has splintered with the Las Vegas MUFON conference, which was called Secret Space Program, which was never done with MUFON before, to my knowledge, has all of a sudden flowered over into this gigantic division of researchers versus experiencers, which should never have happened. So now we're at the place where we're going to see the synthesis. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet. But in a sense, we're kind of in that weird space. I hope to get a chance to talk to Richard Dolan. I will go on the record as saying that I've already spoken with Bill Ryan, and I have been in communication with dark journalists and my concerns about this issue and the schism that's occurred in the communities, and how we have not been served well by being divided this profoundly. It doesn't mean, and I'll go back to my original tenet here of dark data, is that it does not mean that I agree with, am working with, or creating some sort of dark alliance with any of the people I just mentioned. It means I'm willing to sit down and have a conversation with them because they are people who have voices in the media arena that I think we at least need to agree on some ground rules of how to engage with each other. Whether we agree with each other or whether I happen to think that somebody is a bullshit artist, COINTELPRO, or a plan from an intelligence agency has nothing to do with the fact that they're here and that we need to deal with it. And if there is a common interest in creating a valid platform for the exposure of legitimate information, not space birds and ridiculous fantasies about being a translator on this cosmic UN council out somewhere near Zeta Reticuli or the Oregon Quadrant. I mean, can we just get real about this? There is legitimate disclosure about programs. The secret space program is a stealth-coded mind control system that was designed to engage people in a deflection of the actual effect, which was what Elisa E. was talking about in our interview with her, which is it's a weapons platform. They developed a weapons platform. The weapons platform is now visible to us in our skies everywhere. That's one aspect of it.
Yep. The secret, there's the weapons aspect to it, and then there's a mind control aspect of it, and then there's where those two things overlap. and come together. You know what I mean? There was people placed in mind control programs to believe they were going to space or to be having space experiences. There was a weapons program, and then there's the bleed over, which was what sort of Randy just described, in that, you know, the mind control aspect to deflect people away from looking at what's actually going on in our skies above us. So at all points there.
Which
goes
back to Sean Gautreau's information and why that's so important.
Like, literally,
yes, there are people we do promote because they're under-promoted. Sean Gautreau is under-promoted, therefore we do promote Sean Gautreau.
Yeah, if you want to see the most evidence of secret space program, go look at Sean Gautreau's work. He's put forward more evidence than any of these other researchers, any of these other experience, any of this other stuff. What he documents is the secret space program. What the closest thing to that. I mean, I don't want to call it that and mix it in with the rest of this stuff, but he documents the weaponized the weapons platforms that are being used to control our weather systems, our planet, and our minds that are going on just above our head.
That is a secret space program. I mean, as far as we know right now, control of the skies is total control of the domain. That is space as we know it. Because
it doesn't go much higher than that. It doesn't really go much higher than that.
Nobody knows anything about deep space because we haven't been there. And even as I've advanced before, I am strongly a subscriber to the belief that we are accessing what would be called space transoceanically.
Yep, it's water.
And that the Earth itself is probably a continuous plane on levels that we don't understand because right now our science and our mathematics are not capable of calculating any of this. And that is the construct that we're in, the parabolic construct which shifts constantly and can actually be flat space, spheroid, ovoid, all at the same time.
Toroid, all sorts of,
Because it's an array.
Conical, it's an array. It's almost as if we are in a very large building and we are in one room and we somehow think that room and the air above us is space. But outside of that room, there are all of these other rooms within rooms, and they're also moving and changing all around us. But because we, for some reason, feel like we're in a constant, we think that that's what it is. Like we're not in something that is constant at all. And we also, we have no idea where we are, what we're in, or how it exactly works. And it's interesting. I don't know if anyone saw it. Sean had a really interesting video that he took at the New Orleans Aquarium, and he was videoing some certain kinds of jellyfish. And when they got into a certain position, they looked exactly like the triangles that he documents. And it was really a fascinating video. People should go find it on his Industrial Surrealism channel. And he was talking about the oceans above. But yes, I'm not. The space and the ocean may be the same thing. They may be connected in a way that we don't understand. We don't know. But what they're saying it is, it's not. I think that's what we know.
Well, but because we're inside of this construct, we never actually accurately would view it anyway. This is very much, again, Plato's cave, where we're standing at the back of the cave. We understand that there's a light there, but we see the light as being projected through the aperture of a cave. Therefore, we think that the construct outside of us is this round space, which is exactly the argument that the flat earthers have made about the shots of the Earth from a window, or the fact that we have the influence of lenses in which we view what we call the stellar bodies.
Yeah.
Even with our own eyes. It's entirely possible that what we see in the sky, first off, isn't in the sky, because as Lado Leon has correctly said, and we've talked about this as well, there really is no up, there's only out. Yeah. Our vertical space is extremely limited in our understanding. Now, the hard science people who have been trained in physics and astrophysics and aeronautics and space all will argue with you based on the equations that have been purported ever since the time of the Copernican construct, which was really just an expansion of Tycho Brahe, who advanced what was basically a geocentric orbiting sky system. So we move from geocentric to solar-centric.
Heliocentric.
Helios, of course. We have to name it after a god. So, a heliocentric system. And those are all mathematical abstractions. They're based on the viewing of distant bodies through a round ground lens, which creates distortion field. Anybody that's ever done photography knows all about lens distortion. How it is both a tool and something you have to overcome when you're trying to create photography at some level of perfection. So you have that as a construct that we've now worked with for over 400 years. We had Newtonian physics, which brought in this abstraction called gravity, which is like the silly putty of the universe, apparently. And these are the working models that we have for astrophysics. At the same time, that man has been in flight for over a century now, in terms of being able to go up in craft and view from, we'll say, 30 to 50,000 feet, which really doesn't put you up all high enough to be able to see the sphere itself. I mean, how far out do you have to go to see a sphere like the Earth and see it from full perspective?
Or even just to see some kind of curvature if you can't see the whole sphere, right?
Well, the curvature itself, again, is created largely as a visual aspect of viewing from a top down. What do they call a bird's eye view?
Yeah, well, even when you're and also when you're in the airplane, those windows, they're very curved also. So
they're always portals. And the glass is curved and it's thick.
It's thick and it's like Coke bottle lenses. It's, you know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, I got a pair of glasses here that I'm still trying to get used to because of the curvature of the lenses and the fact that they're correcting my vision. And what they did was they sacrificed my peripheral vision in order to be able to strengthen my vision forward in terms of correcting multiple deficiencies in my own eyesight.
Are you saying that it's your glasses that are causing the Earth to be a sphere, Randy?
I believe it is, actually. and I've got tunnel vision now.
Randy's glasses are the whole reason we have the flat Earth, round Earth debate, right?
But ultimately, the filter in all of this is a conscious mind.
Totally. Yep.
I mean, it's the graphical user interface for everything that we see.
Everything. Yep.
And then we have this split nature, this split mind. We have the so-called conscious mind and the subconscious mind.
The bicameral mind.
The bicameral mind is very interesting. That's hemispheric.
Yeah.
But the division of labor between what we call the mind and of course everybody thinks that occurs in the brain. Wrong. But we'll localize it. We'll give it credit for that. The brain functions are basically like a big processing unit, CPU.
Yep.
But they're split. So most of the time we're operating in this very slow real-time function that does not allow us full use of our own mental capabilities.
Okay. Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, I think the only time we're supposedly having full use of our mental capabilities, and I don't even know if this is full use, is when we're either in REM sleep or when you can achieve a state through right-left activity. That's what the therapy called EMDR is based on. It's you can look it up. It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and it's a process of stimulating the right and left side of the body, or you can do it by walking, or you can do it by having something in your hand that buzzes right and then left and then right and then left. If you do that for a significant period of time repetitively, then it brings both sides of the mind online at the same time, but then that doesn't even account for the non-local parts of consciousness or whatever. So yeah, I don't know that we ever really have access to all of the functioning parts of our mind at the same time.
Well, no, because it's been largely programmed out of us. This is what I've talked about before in terms of this forward visioning thing that we do, where we're trained to look forward. Yeah. Most of our educational process takes place. Well, how? We're reading books. We're looking at an instructor. We're looking at a chalkboard, whiteboard, overhead display that's giving us information in flat space. Rarely in the educational system or the process of what they call education are we using real-time sensory perception in a 3D space. Yeah. We are not processing peripheral, this goes back to the whole thing with my glasses. Yeah, the peripheral is so important, yeah. The peripheral vision itself actually connects millions of optical nerve endings that extend past the cornea of the eye into the rear optical nerve that connects up into the neurosystem to the pineal gland. Isn't it interesting also how the same things one would see out of the quote-unquote corner of their eye or whatever, their peripheral vision, are also some of the things that people want to say don't really exist, right? Like sometimes you see something out of the corner of your eye and then you turn and it's not there, and they say, oh, it's because it doesn't really exist. So it's almost like anything in your peripheral vision has been relegated to being paranormal or not real or whatever. And I think that's probably not likely the truth. I think there's probably very significant things that we're supposed to be seeing and processing, both in our peripheral vision and in our rear vision, that we have been taught to either ignore or to marginalize, and instead look straight ahead at what is being projected at us. Well, that's actually where the paranormal occurs. I can tell you, out of the corner of your eye. Most of my paranormal experiences have occurred as a result of what I viewed out of the peripheral vision. And it's very quick. And the reason for it is because of all the nerve sensings on your peripheral vision, they're capable of picking up very rapid movements that you don't see with your front vision again. Especially anytime I viewed anything like remember, you were talking about this on the show a couple of years back before I even knew you, the sort of the dark man or the shadow man or whatever. You view that out of the corner of your eye. Anything sort of like archonic, like archons, anything sort of like large sort of, insectoid, sort of interdimensional, digital insectoid kind of things, that stuff that generally is viewed out of the peripheral or the quote-unquote corner of the eye. Well, isn't it interesting, too, you mentioned digital, that now what we're getting as we go into this era of virtual reality, which is binary processing, is that these glasses, the Google glasses, were kind of a failure, and we'll see how Oculus works out as it goes forward. But they're all using these wraparound headsets that give us like a 90-degree view, which we're not doing in the real world. But when we go, they only want us to have that when they're programming what we're going to see back there. And that's largely because that will desensitize again our natural viewing abilities by programming them to the digital frequencies, the processor speeds, the speed of the pixels inside of these goggles, and even the chroma, the color arrays that they're going to give you. Because I can tell you that the things that I viewed paranormally out of my peripheral vision don't tend to have a lot of color. It's very subtle. But there's waves of color there. But you see, we now live in the plasma screen era where colors are so bright. They are so huge, and they are just washing us in all of these colors that are extraordinary. They're very beautiful, but they're not natural, they're not real, and they are dulling our senses in a way that we're not perceptually able anymore to detect the subtle fluid movements of color and light vibration that occur naturally. And when I say naturally, I include paranormal in that because I don't think paranormal is abnormal.
No, I think it's very natural.
No, that's actually where we get the breakthroughs about ourselves.
Yeah, totally.
This was the programming that the hierarchy jammed at us in the projects. Basically, the projects were about forcing us into this whole traumatically induced levels of enhanced mental acuity and physical endurance and psychic abilities, while at the same time partitioning that off only to be used by them like a machine, while the mainstream of society thinks that all of this stuff is just woo.
And then the rest of the time in our normal day-to-day life, we're told that stuff isn't real. So we're forced into it. Our skills or abilities to see, perceive, interact with that are exploited and manipulated in this one area of our life, and then in the rest of our day-to-day life that we have to live in on a most of the time we're told that stuff isn't real.
Well, it's the big lie of AI right now is largely you have to be enhanced in order to do this. Machine augmentation is like the way to cripple us permanently because we know about epigenetics. We know that while I don't subscribe to evolution per se, there is a type of adaptation that occurs over time in species. And that the species will conform because of environment and nature, nurture, all of the aspects that go into it. We would be crippled psychically by the use of these machines. That's the level, that's the threat that we're at right now. Yeah. This is actually the AI construct coming in because, as ridiculous as it sounds, if they can containerize us in a digital environment, they can severely restrict our physical movements, our ability to interact with what we call the natural environment, which is as close as we have to being close to something that's physically in the same harmonic that we are, our bodies. You know, whether you think the earth itself is sort of this artificial construct, our bodies themselves are harmonically wedded to the frequencies of the earth itself. It's native to us.
Totally.
And so
we are actually part of the earth. So our vibration, we are. We are not living on something else. We are not, just visitors here to, in a sense we are, but in another sense we're not. We are actually part of the earth, and the harmonic synchronicity and interplay is very important both to the earth and to us.
Yeah. And so the digital AI that's being brought in largely is designed not to augment us, but to give us a synthetic substitute for what we really are.
Yeah. Totally. That's exactly right.
Hey, just think about it. Think about the movie Rain Man. Dustin Hoffman's character, Raymond.
Yeah.
Raymond was an autistic savant. I mean, this guy could recall minute details. He was the ultimate obsessive compulsive disorder type. Plus the fact that he could sit there and do these incredibly intricate formulas and mathematical equations in his head on demand, which is an accurate portrayal of certain spectrum of autism, is that they're actually brilliant. And the reason they're brilliant is because they're very focused. The mind of a savant largely is so focused on a specific spectrum that it appears supernatural to us because we're out there dangling around in an environment which is competing for our attention. We give 98% of our attention to what's worth about 5% of value in our lives. And it's an inversion. The things we need to focus on, when we're able to do it, you would reverse the equation. Really, we need to give 98% of our attention most of the time to what's going on inside of our bodies and inside of our own conscious, subconscious mind. Because if we do that, what the projects were doing wasn't splitting the mind. It was actually fusing the two minds together in a way to make it a usable apparatus.
For the period of time that they wanted to use it, and then sort of disconnecting it and sending us back into the real world to.
Yes, they split the personality, but the personality itself had access to things that even the front alder or the main personality, the core personality, did not have.
Yeah.
And Duncan's talked about this, and Lisa's talked about it. Perfect memory, being able to do total recall. Those are things that seem really exotic to the average person because, again, our environment is actually destroying our ability to do all of that. I mean, we all have a tiny nascent bit of Alzheimer's in each of us. I can see it in myself. Even my own memory sometimes is a little porous compared to what it used to be. I mean, you just have to allow for that. I'm fighting that, and I think we all have to fight it. But the creation of the alters allowed them to compartmentalize something quite extraordinary in a human being and control it.
Well, it's almost like creating this compartmentalization is almost like creating thumb drives and keeping all information pertinent to certain, like having certain files on thumb drives. All information pertinent to certain things is in that personality or in that alter, and it's compartmentalized in that section. So it's almost like having, you have a box next to your computer and you have 50 different thumb drives in there, and you can just insert which one you want. That's kind of like, the other thing you were saying, so you were saying that the most important thing is for us to focus on what's going on inside of our own body and our own minds and our own consciousness. I absolutely agree. And then to the extent that we focus on what's going on outside of us, it should really be more focused on what's going on. A friend of mine said this the other day, it was perfect, in the 5 feet around us. And they have us so worried about things going on in space, in places that we've never been, and that we're likely never going to go to, in other parts of the world that may or may not exist as we've been told that they exist, on the other side of the country with groups of people we've never met, with people we'll never meet. And literally, like, most people don't even how many times do you see people, like, they're on their phone, they're reading about the missile porn going on in North Korea, and they're walking into a bus while they're looking at their phone, or they're walking up the upside of the down elevator because they're not paying attention to what's going on right around them. So they have us so worried about everything out there that may or may not exist.
That's what I was talking about. 98% of your attention is being consumed by something that has 5% or less of value to your life right now. Because quite honestly, and you can do this as an experiment. I do it fairly often. It's what James Martinez calls a media fast. You just you did this a few weeks ago. You just unplug the goddamn thing. You unplug the computer, take the battery out of the phone, or at least turn it off and throw it in like a metal filing cabinet someplace. Put a foil on it. I mean,
put your tinfoil hat on.
Put your tinfoil hat on your phone.
Hey guys, sorry. While we're here, I just want to say, I have for the last couple of weeks been unplugging the router when I sleep and finding my sleep to be much better, much less interrupted. I just completely unplug it out of the wall. And the other night, I accidentally fell asleep before I did that, and I had what was very clearly to me some sort of strange inserted programmed kind of dream. Got up, unplugged the router, went back to sleep, slept the rest of the night perfectly fine. So especially they're starting to put in, like, when I moved into my new house, the router that they gave us from the cable company is a 5G router. Even though they don't have 5G up and going yet, the router is a 5G. So these routers are not good for you. I recommend everybody, some of you probably already do and probably do way more stuff that I should be doing, but unplug the router when you sleep, man.
Well, these routers
already.
The routers, the smart meters, the electromagnetic grid that's all around us now, that's all artificial, the proliferation of hotspots, mobile phones in every direction, creates an entire electromagnetic spectrum that human beings have not lived in this epoch of our beingness. In other words, in what we understand as, quote, recorded history, we've not lived in the magnitude of electromagnetic radiation that we now have.
Nope.
And the vector for that largely becomes one of extreme programmability, and the fact that I think these routers are a vector for what John Kelly called dream warfare.
Totally. Psychotronic warfare in the dreams?
Absolutely.
Totally. I remember you did some pieces on some things he did. Have you ever actually had him on?
Yes.
No?
Yes,
You did.
John Kelly came on.
I remember.
That's going to actually be a bonus episode for people who subscribe up to Patreon, is John Kelly's interview.
I remember you had that fascinating series of things with him about after when he had that person who had the inserted dream about the Gabby Giffords thing or whatever. Fascinating, dude. Yeah,
this is where we're at because the thin lines, the membrane between fantasy, reality. I mean, think about how controllable people become when you're able to hit key triggers in dream state.
Well, think about that thing in the little clip we just recorded just for our own personal history. What I was talking about, that's exactly that. I just completely lost my train of thought.
That's okay. There's a whole range of thoughts here, and we're certainly not going to be able to flesh them all out. I'll put the article out probably in segments because it's a very rangy article. But maybe where we go from here, because we're really talking about, again, a continuum of topics, the August 21st eclipse.
Okay.
Because that eclipse was as many things to people as they both imagined it to be, and as it was programmed to be.
It was it was like an array, a kaleidoscope.
It was a media event.
Yeah.
It was promoted heavily. I mean, you had people camping out. You had people setting up in fields days before the event. You had music festivals created around it.
You had the music festivals and conferences created around it.
So it was, right, of course. And so we had this huge media event built around what was supposed.
You had a postage stamp. There was a U.S. postage stamp created for it, which tells you.
Actually, the postage stamp itself was, you could take the postage stamp outside and expose it to the eclipse and make your own eclipse exposure stamp.
You could just touch it with your thumb. If you press down hard enough on it, it would turn from the one to the other.
Now, the last time I looked, the U.S. Postal Service Incorporated is a subsidiary of the United States of America Incorporated. So I have to assume that there was a fair amount of government imprimatur on this whole event, largely through NASA, who provided the disinfo on exactly what this event was, because I'm going to tell you something. This event was so creepy in so many ways, and a lot of people really felt the energy, and a lot of people really doubted what they felt and saw and experienced in the energy of this eclipse. Like I said, it felt to me like it was kind of programmable in itself, because you could perceive it in so many different ways. And
it was like the eclipse itself was programmable matter.
Well, it very much was. But the one thing it couldn't present to you was an argument that the moon ever actually moved into the path of the sun. I watched this. I watched it for an hour and a half. I went to 2 different locations to watch this. One was personally meaningful to me. It was the place where I was the day before September 11th, 2001, when I had this premonition and I broke down weeping and didn't know what it was about. And the next day, boom, you have the whole 9/11 thing, which to me was a supernatural event as much as a natural event. And it was well, let's just say, I think Fringe got it right. About 9/11 and the World Trade Center and the bifurcated reality that created. That's actually a central core theme of the TV series Fringe.
Yeah, when we don't, actually I found sometimes what's better than hard evidence is just fringe, right?
Fringe encapsulated this, whatever that show was.
Totally.
It encapsulated a lot of things that we're still grappling with, and the resolution to that series very much, I think people should look at that and understand the resolution to two worlds that have been split apart.
Yep.
Now we're getting into the construct aspect of this.
Now we're
Because the two worlds aspect of this is something that must be resolved one way or another, as it was in Fringe.
Yep.
Is it the destruction of one world for another one to continue, or is one world an inverse mirror image of the real world, but which is which? This is kind of like the point where you get with people who talk about the cloning.
Yeah.
And we've heard Lotta Leone talk about this, and the fact that at some point, the clone may actually be better than the original because the clone hasn't been screwed with, but the human has. And so the organic aspect of this versus the inverse mirror effect becomes kind of touchy, because we're talking about a civilization, we're talking about a world that theoretically must split. And I'm mapping Fringe on this, but it's my own sense. I've been delving around in this since I started the show in 2009. It was one of the first shows I did was with Dr. Brooks Agnew on this.
Yeah. Remembering the future.
Remembering the future.
I remember, yep.
And
I
so,
remember.
And that actually, 2009, we were right. I had not watched much of Fringe at that point. So this is a meme that's been out there for, I will say, since September 11th, 2001. I believe.
Yeah.
I believe a world was split and another distinctive parallel inverted mirror reality world was created.
Yeah.
Now, from my perspective, watching the eclipse and watching it first from the location where I had my premonition on September 10th, 2001, and then watching it, I went to my car and I parked my car in a location where I had a very good expanse of sky at about 400 feet above sea level to watch the eclipse. And I watched it first off on the fourth floor of my office building, which has this huge pyramid atrium. I watched the early part of it from that pyramid atrium. That was incredibly creepy.
Yeah.
Watched it from the roof of the sunroof on my car has a wind deflector on it. It's a I guess maybe 40% smoked glass.
The moonroof.
And it's a moonroof. And I put the cell phone camera up inside that behind the glass. I put on a pair of very dark Ray-Ban sunglasses, and I watched the eclipse both through the camera and through my own eyes. And I can tell you that what the camera recorded simultaneously was not what my eyes were seeing, but what neither one of them ever recorded was a moon.
Yeah.
Whatever was going on in the sky that day, that moon wasn't in that position. And there's so many things that were unexplained about this eclipse in terms of even why the eclipse began in the west and moved eastward on an arc which concluded exactly on the 33rd parallel at Charleston, which is one of the most occult Masonic cities on the East Coast, at least.
Yeah.
It's one of the major Masonic lodges in the United States. And so we had this weird, trippy thing. The arc of the thing, it ran across Route 66.
Yeah.
It went through 3 towns that were named...
Clarksville.
Salem, right?
Oh, Salem. And then Salem. Yeah, Salem, not Clarksville.
Which is Jerusalem.
Yeah. Jerusalem. And there was all sorts of strange things about it. And then there was all these sort of rituals that went on around it for
tons of rituals
for many, many months. I also I think I've mentioned this a few times before, maybe, but we haven't really delved into this, and we won't delve into it tonight, but at some point we will. Sometimes I get this intuitive feeling that when we're looking at the sun and we're looking at the moon, we are looking at the same thing, and that it's just being used differently, programmed differently, having something different projected off of it or emitted. My cat's starting to get crazy here. Emitted out of it. So yeah, like if the sun and the moon are the same, if we're looking at the same or focusing on the same thing in the sky, that would sort of explain that there's no way that it could have been, unless if they're the same thing, then they're sort of always in eclipse, right? If it's, I don't know, I've had the feeling many times that there's just some sort of circular hole or disk or something in the sky that things are being projected off of, and that possibly there's the thing, it's the sun and the moon are like the same thing. So I don't know what that does for the eclipse. Any thoughts on that? Like when you were saying that you didn't see a moon in front of it, if they're actually not two separate, distinct things, then that would explain that as well. What was that then that moved in front?
Well, I've observed the sky long enough that I've seen the moon and the sky, the moon and the sun in the sky simultaneously. And so I have to assume that there's two orbs there. When I say that, let me just clarify. When I say that, I'm not saying that there is never or was never. Like me and a friend of mine talk about the fact that like there's a real sun and then there's a fake sun, and that possibly the thing that is the fake sun is the same thing that is supposedly the moon. And sometimes we get the real sun and sometimes we get the fake sun, and the fake sun is that one that is like white shimmery copper. Yeah. It's it's basically a reflector array. So what if they're projecting something off of the same structure or same thing that is supposedly the moon? So I'm not saying there is no. I don't think, and Cliff High's talked about this as well, that the sun isn't hot. I don't think it's actually cold, and it's probably an aperture, and it is entirely likely if we follow again the model they gave us. This gets really dicey. Almost every other solar system has binary suns. Right. Now that's following the model. Right. That's following, the whole model that of celestial mechanics, which I challenge, but maybe not. Maybe in deep space that's true. And maybe what we see reflected in the sky is a distant echo of something. But the fact of the matter is that the sun is in all likelihood, it's an aperture. Yeah. The moon itself is not it's not reflected light from the sun. I sat last night, we had a full moon, and I pondered this. I looked at and I'm like, okay, so if that's the moon and it's shining that brightly right now, where would the sun be right now? And then now we get back into celestial mechanics and the fact that we now have to factor the Earth rotating and the moon rotating around the Earth and the Earth rotating around the sun. And you remember those ball things that they used to have in science class where you had the whole solar system and arms with balls on it. Yes. And they would go through all these elaborate. Yes. It's a clockwork. Yeah. That's what they've modeled this whole thing on. This is the Saturn-Moon matrix right there. This is celestial mechanics. Real celestial mechanics is based on the illusions of the lunar Saturnian Chronos system. It's based on a clockwork, which again is a model of a system that we have subscribed to, we have agreed to, therefore, in some sense, it's real. I think that goes for everything. But it's only real because they designed the construct, they gave us the models, and in our minds, we're modeling this. Yeah. We are reflecting this. That's sort of my point, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Is that we just focus on a circle in the sky and it's reflecting back to us what we're just working through this, because there really aren't words for a lot of this stuff. Yeah. It isn't that the sun and the moon are the same, but that we're focusing on a similar kind of model, and we see the sun, we see them. That's a better description of what I exactly meant. But but I think they do that with everything. I think that
with the events that happen in the world, whether they happen or not. Just saying that they happened and getting people to focus their attention on that, ultimately, it's like as if they happened, right? So it's the same thing with any of this kind of stuff. They focus our mind on a certain thing and tell us what it is, and then that's what we see.
Well, now very, very interesting that all of a sudden, after 12 years of almost no Gulf Stream creating any type of severe weather patterns out in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and in the Gulf, all of a sudden, right after this eclipse, in comes this gigantic hurricane, one of the biggest we've ever seen, that dumps 811 billion gallons of water in Houston.
Right.
Apparently, a city that can actually survive that. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Houston is home to the most giant bugs and cockroaches I've ever seen, so it doesn't surprise me that Houston would be able to...
and there's also insects there as well.
We used to come out of, when I lived in Austin, we used to go to parties in Houston, and we'd come out of the party at like 6 or 7 in the morning, and it was so humid. There'd be these just enormous bugs on your windshield, and your windshield would be all fogged up. And so,
by the way, I'm glad you said that. I don't know what it's like in the West, the Midwest, but here in the East, folks, if you're washing your car, and you really should from time to time, I've noticed over the last 2 years, I'm not cleaning bugs off the front of my car anymore.
No bugs on the lights, on the lights or on the windshield. Not here either. Yeah, ever.
That's really interesting because that tells you something about your ecosystem.
Yep.
Is this the result of a mass die-off? Is this kind of like the bees thing?
Or are we just in something where there isn't that level of organic nature anymore?
That level of organic material. Because I have traditionally...
No squashed bugs on windshields or anything like that. No,
it used to be, and I live in a river valley here. In the summertime, when you drove, especially at dusk, you'd have to actually get out with a scraper at some point.
You know what else I don't get on my car anymore? Bird shit. I haven't had bird shit on my car in years, probably. And I used to get bird shit on my car all the time.
I have to say here, we still get some of that, but that's largely because I live among really large trees.
Me too. No bird shit.
Wow, that's amazing. So nature itself is kind of turned as well. It was interesting you brought that up because we just had that conversation here, and I said to my wife, I said, have you noticed? Because she doesn't wash her car, I wash it, and not very often either. But I said,
good for her.
Bugs on windshield, you're going to notice that. And,
totally.
And like I said, around here, because of being in a river valley, there's a proliferation of bugs that at night they swarm and they come right towards your headlights. And I mean, the front of your car would be plastered with them. Guys that own tractor trailers used to complain all the time.
You used to be able to see them in the glare from the lights too. When you had your headlights on, you don't see them in the glare anymore.
So something's changed, and you can call it a die-off or you can call it whatever you want. But we're seeing changes accelerate rapidly now, but most people are not paying attention for all the reasons we talked about earlier in this segment, which had to do with the fact that we are so focused on our programming. Our 85 to 98% of attention is constantly being directed at the 5% that's... It's the inversion. Our 98% is directed to the most ineffective 5% of our lives, while 98% of our attention needs to be focused on the narrowest of data that surrounds our own space, our own bodies, our own consciousness, and our own minds.
That's exactly right.
To just kind of close the loop on the eclipse, and I'd like to get your feedback on what you think it is. But I'll tell you what I saw.
All right.
We entered into a phase in 2001. This goes back to the whole fringe thing. And what I see now, and it's been coming up in increasing waves, because most of this is like temporal scalar waves somehow. So we had this whole 4-year looping thing that suddenly kicked up, where we started to see old memes, old media figures, old routines coming back out into the segment of alternative media that we're kind of a part of. But it got me to thinking about patterns and cycles and realizing that we're recording this on September 5th. So in 6 days, we will be at the 16th anniversary of 9/11. That's 4 4-year cycles.
Yep.
4-year cycles are extremely meaningful. And they're 4 years.
That's why they put the Olympics every 4 years.
Of course it is, or the presidential elections.
Yep. Yep.
But they seem to operate on these 4-year cycles for some reason. So we're now concluding the 4th of 4 cycles since 9/11. And when I went to that place to watch the eclipse, there was the place where I had my premonition of 9/11. I got this, it was actually a visual of this concept that what this eclipse really is it's a temporal event.
Yeah.
That I got the sense this was not a vision, this was just in my head. What I was perceiving is that what my perception told me is that we had transitioned over onto another track of time space. That effectively, because we talk about timelines, we're kind of stuck with that metaphor. They're not really lines.
Yeah,
Time itself is not real.
They're more like tracts. They're more like tracts of land that
you nailed it. Yes.
Yeah. So they're more like tracts of land that you can reap, harvest, sow, rearrange, do stuff to, whatever. And sort of like once you've completed that tract.
Okay. So this is the article that we're citing for this tonight. You use that term. But what I wrote here, and I'll read this part of it, it says, what is very clear to me now is that this was also a temporal event that may have transitioned us over onto another track in inverse commas of the time-space system. And what I wrote here is said, imagine a set of parallel rails that loop endlessly. There are various jump points in the celestial mechanical system, much like the switches on a rail system, that divert a train from one line into another. In effect, the August 21st eclipse was the event where the switch was pulled in plain view, placing us back into a temporal line reset prior to September 11th, 2001.
Yeah, so I think track and track.
Track and track. No accidents here. And folks, Emily didn't see this article. So I haven't
read the article. Miranda sent me some data points, but I haven't seen I didn't know he talked about that. But yes, I think we're dealing with tracks, just like you talked about, like the old railway tracks line, and tracks. Like we are presented with almost like chunks of temporal space, temporal area that we can sort of do work within and do things in. And then when we've sort of completed that, sort of reaped and harvested that tract of land onto the next one, same thing. It is not timelines. I really think we should step away from using that term.
They're not lines, first off. It would more correctly be called time waves.
Time waves, time loops, time... Yeah. But I think any of those.
But it was weird, the picture that I got, they were very complimentary because I was viewing tracks. But I'm viewing tracks as like railroad tracks. So you have multiple lines running parallel with each other.
Yeah.
They're only parallel at certain points. And this is important, and this actually goes into what you're talking about. They only converge for specific periods of time, and within the parallelism, then there's that critical moment when a switch has to be pulled to move them to another track, which then moves them into another tract.
Yep. Yes, and if you're thinking about parcels of land also, like if you're thinking, let's just say you have an entire property, an entire field, and in that field there's several tracts of land, and they, like, let's say that you have an acre and you've separated into 4 parts, they all connect sort of at one spot, and that's sort of like where the interchange is, but sort of different things can happen in each tract. You know what I mean? There's sometimes some pullover, some crossover, some switching things from this field, like the pollen and whatever can go over here. There's all... they're both really good, valid ways of describing it. Waves, loops, tracks, tracts. Let's get rid of the lines.
We'll get rid of the lines because that forces you back into Platonic solids again, which is another mind trap. All of the science, look, when science and mechanics work inside of the system, I have profound respect for engineers, scientists, people that make shit work. Obviously, we need them. Their system works within the realm of the mechanical world that we exist in, and then extending that into the technological world, the binary silicone world that we're now transitioning into, because the new machines are all virtual. So there's all these ways to envision what we're dealing with here. But the bottom line for me is the fact that much like the landscape, the tracts of land in the rearview mirror, a lot of this is growing very distant now. And we are moving very quickly into another phase. And there's a lot of weirdness that I kind of see in what is called the glitches. Because the Mandela Effect, which I think the Mandela Effect is real, I do think that most of what has been posited as Mandela Effect out there. Somebody asked me about this in a Facebook message yesterday. A lot of what's posited as Mandela Effect itself is actually just information flow that over time our memories are not perfect. The reproduction of information isn't perfect. Some of it's very legitimate, though, and there are things that kind of make you stop and go,
I do think that there have been some inserts and some edits, but there have also been a lot of not remembering accurately or correctly or having sort of a collective amnesia about something.
Well, this is the edit. You remember the conversation you and I had one night. This was a private session you and I were doing. When I talked about the missing frame, I felt like there was a critical point in my life that I couldn't retrieve, and I kept referring to it as a missing frame.
Like one frame from the strip of film was missing.
It was missing, but it was a critical frame.
I think that we're all suffering from that.
And see, cryptographically, we assemble information inside of the brain, including our visual information, and there are decoder keys in all of it. And so a missing frame, it's just like you had talked about the Zapruder film earlier.
Yeah.
Well, imagine for a minute that there was a key frame from the Zapruder film that was removed.
I'm sure there is.
Well, of course there was. Now, understand that 8mm film, even at that time, had some crude form of time code in it.
Yeah.
So if you take a frame or you take a keyframe, which is, keyframing is actually how you do timing inside of digital video.
Sorry, go ahead.
The keyframe will completely destroy the time code of the rest of the continuous strip.
I mean, when you remove that frame, it also then distorts the one that came before it and the one after it, so it fucks up the whole damn thing.
Yeah,
you know
so you can have 99.99% of all the data and information correct, and if that keyframe is missing, you're screwed.
Yeah. So I have to share something funny real fast about the Mandela Effect, just to show you what a strange world we're living in here. I had to explain. My sister's been in town visiting, and I love my sister dearly, and she's a wonderful, beautiful, honest noble person with lots of integrity, but we very much differ in our worldview of things. And we were at breakfast this morning, and I mentioned the Mandela Effect, and she didn't know what it was, and so I had to explain it to her. But she asked me before I explained it if that's where you end up being a political prisoner for years and years because you help people fight oppression. So I was like, oh, well, I'm not even going to touch South Temporal, but I explained to her what, for our purposes, it was. But my sister has her PhD in African studies, and she focuses on South Africa. Yeah. So she thought it was very funny, and she laughed. When I told her what it was, she laughed, and we had a good laugh and whatever.
That is actually funny.
It's quite funny,
from
right?
From a perspective, of course you're going to think like that.
Right? Yeah.
And see, she doesn't live in this Susan of steamy material that we bask in all the time in the alternative media. I mean,
but she lives in her own her own. Yeah. So, but it was very over the years. Particularly in the last couple of years, we've gotten better and better at being respectful of each other's perspectives on the world, and sometimes we overlap on things, and we both pay attention to what each other are doing, and acknowledge that we're sort of working hard in our own areas of things. But it was very funny this morning. While my nephew was there doing all sorts of silly stuff, I'm explaining to her what the Mandela Effect is, and that was what she thought it was. It was very funny.
The nephew, the kids, the children, that's the purest expression right there.
Yeah.
This is where we need to go back to.
And my nephew thinks my nephew has tried to spent all day yesterday telling me and convincing all of the other children in the playground where we were playing at that I was a T-Rex. So, that I was a Tyrannosaurus Rex that was chasing him around the playground and he needed help getting away from me. Yes, that's our most important taproot is to try and get back to the mindset we had before we were programmed with all this indoctrination, the purity of that. And, this is something you can do in your meditation time is start to grab a hold. Go look for a missing keyframe in your life. Figure out one thing that you can't narrow down. And this is how memory retrieval's done. This is how I worked with my own memories this way. A tape recorder, a notepad, and I sat back and I just simply let the film roll and look for the edit point, because that's exactly what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about.
We're talking about an edit point. We're talking about code insertion, code deletion, however you want to view that. I think there's some fantastic work being done on this right now. And
you can focus on it in your meditation. I also find focusing on it when I'm exercising in nature. I do some of my best restitching together of the film in its proper order and its proper whatever. When I'm, out there, I'm running in nature, I see the squirrels and the butterflies and whatever, and just sometimes I will have like a thought that then helps me to retrieve a memory that is a missing frame to a particular strip of film that I'm trying to work with. So, yeah.
Yeah, all of that. So, the only thing I want to say is that, based on what I got out of the eclipse, keep your eyes on this period between now and I'll say mid to late October. I don't know that I sense anything coming directly on September 11th. I think there's going to be subtleties built into this. I think our own calendar system is so flawed that September 11th really doesn't matter. It was an occult symbolic date, as was, by the way, 9/21. So understand that the rituals...
As is 9/23, which a lot of people are talking about as, you know what I mean? So
I'm sorry, 8/21, which was the eclipse.
8/21 at 9/23, which is coming, which a lot of people think is sort of the end of this period as well. And
well, they encode their rituals with numbers. We know that. We know that there's all kinds of gematria and magic that's woven into all this. That's their system.
Just totally love it. Yeah,
our system's more organic, but we can use this. And if I'm correct in that we made this jump point, then I think you're going to begin to see a lot more. You're going to begin to see perhaps the Mandela effect aggregate a bit more. I would expect that we may actually start to notice things that do drop our jaw. It's not going to be whether it was Sex in the City or Sex and the City. It's probably going to be, where's the fucking city? I mean, it may actually get to that point.
Yeah. No, I agree. My only observations on the eclipse, and then maybe we'll wrap it up for this one, and we'll get into some of this other stuff on the.
No, there's a ton of this stuff we need to cover. Yeah. There's no time for any more.
So I didn't watch it because mostly because I was at work, but also I had kind of decided I wasn't gonna look. For some reason, my intuition was to not look. But I was at work. But for some reason, my genius bosses at work decided to put in a new computer system. I work in a restaurant, put in a new computer system that day, and I have never experienced anything going so badly in my entire life, and it went on for 2 weeks. This computer system totally failed, did not work in any way like any computer system I've ever worked on in a restaurant worked, and was like a total complete disaster for 2 weeks, and we finally got rid of it, went back to our old system. And to me, like that was that experience that I had at work for those 2 weeks sort of mirrored what was going on in the rest of my life.
Failing code base right there.
Those 2 weeks, I had some other crazy stuff going on in my life during that period of time, and I just had to surf that wave. And it was kind of ultimately we rejected that chaos at work, and ultimately I rejected the other chaos that was going on.
And you reverted back to the old version.
I reverted back to an old version, a more organic system, and I think that's kind of I think that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about like denying technology or anything like that, but like let's just only use technology or systems that actually work. And these other ones, no matter how high tech and cool they look and stuff, if they actually don't work in a way that is beneficial or productive for us, the humans that are the creators, then we just need to scrap them and, revert to something. It's not even going back to the old way, although I do think there are some old ways we need to go back to. It's like reverting to something that actually is more in organic synchronicity, like we were talking about with ourselves, with the earth earlier in the conversation, to ways that are more organically synchronistic for what it is we're trying to accomplish. Yeah, and so to me, there was some chaos that came with the eclipse, but I think some of that was created because of anticipation. But it was ultimately a wave, and you had to ride it. And for some, it's still going on. I think Randy's correct. I think this is sort of an ongoing sort of period or event. And I think, wax your surfboards up, kids.
There you go. Surfing the chaos.
We're going to be surfing for a while, and it's just don't panic. Don't, you're going to get frustrated and upset, and it's going to seem real messy sometimes, but like,
Are you sure you didn't read did you remote view my article? You're actually, this is amazing because you're psychically kind of absorbing the closing of this article, so. Wax your surfboards up, wax your surfboards, and don't panic, kids. And, the sharks can smell fear. So just, we're going for a ride. And it's going to, but I actually think there's going to be really something we're going to learn that is beneficial from this. And so, yeah. Yeah, we're not doom and gloomers here at all. That's it. Anything else we want to toss on the oops, don't want to go with the fire, the Burning Man, don't want to do that. No more of that.
Let's not do that. All right. So this will wrap this is going to be the first little bonus podcast for Patreon. This wraps this one up. And is that what this is?
No, we're going to go public with this. This is a teaser. Okay. This is hey guys, we're going to do this more often. Yeah,
this will be when we do bonus videos for Patreon, there'll be things sort of like this. Yeah. Anyway, all right, lots of cool things coming in the next few weeks. We have some things lined up.
Announcements are coming. If you know how to find the shows, you'll know the information.
Maybe we'll get James to make the announcements.
There we go. Well, yes, we will. Absolutely.
We have announcements, and this time they'll be official.
We will announce that he's announcing that we're going to announce.
You'll know the announcements are official when they come from
That's
James.
Exactly right. He's the press agent of the universe.
Yeah.
James Martinez. All right, folks, that's it. Hey, you know what? We love you guys. Be brave, be bold. The truth is out there. It's inside you. We'll be back real soon.
Alrighty, awesome.